Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Ortiz, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar Ortiz and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant. And I'm delighted to have with me today Julieta Moreno, who is an international employment and mobility lawyer. Hello, Julieta.
Hello, Pilar. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm delighted that you're here because we met because you reacted to a post about Management Cafe, the other show I have. And of course, we are connected through Tim Burgess and we met and we talked and I thought, yeah, this is going to be a great episode.
Great. Fantastic.
And listeners will discover why as we go along. So you've been offboarding director and expert in global mobility as well as EOR, employment of record, more recently with Shield Geo and then for Velocity Global. And I wanted to ask you, how did you end up doing that kind of work, which is so specific?
Wow. It is a job that I didn't ask to do. You don't apply for a job like that. It just happens to be the need for that. I joined as a subject matter expert, as a mobility and employment lawyer. And offboarding is such an interesting and necessary part of the employment life cycle that it is a best practice to have an offboarding area or people dedicated to the offboarding part of an employment. And I learned to love it. And I got to meet great people that also love to do that because it's very thrilling and interesting. You get to work with people. You are amazed by human nature and creativity and what people do in stressful times and how resourceful people are. It's just fantastic. I loved it.
So how did you end up working for, an employment of record? Just explain a little bit more what that industry is or what that kind of company is.
Yes. So it is a relatively new but thriving industry. It is one of the industry that grew bigger with the pandemic, interestingly enough. It is a business that employs your resources in countries where your company doesn't have an entity. So an employer of record takes care of all the admin and legal aspect of keeping an employee legally employed in one country. So it allows startups to expand geographically in countries where they don't have an entity. But also now businesses tend to focus on what they know and what they want to do. And everything else can be outsourced to other businesses that take care of that. And it grew so much. There's so much potential for companies and for HR business to use EOR companies to solve their employment needs.
And so when you say that you are offboarding director, does that mean you help the companies that are employing people through you help them to offboard, or did you used to do it directly?
We used to do it directly. We're the function that is in charge of legally terminating the contract for the client, which is the company, and the employee, which is also the client. They're both our clients. And we help them drive the conversation in a compliant manner because it's very difficult to know the legislation of every country. And also we make suggestions and we also handhold the employee throughout the process because it's it's a new industry. So your end employer, your actual management employer, is in another country. It is remote, so you need somebody to trust, and this is us. We help the employer and we help the employee.
It sounds like a very difficult job, to be honest, and especially you use the word termination to I suppose to end the employment relationship. So at what point do you come in? So say that you're one of your client, the employer, your client, the employer has decided that they don't need this person for whatever reason, or that that's it. Did they then come to you and say, "We've got this person, we need to end to terminate their contract. Can you help us?" And what would happen then?
Yes, and I said, yes, definitely, I can help you. Unfortunately, termination is the legal and the correct way of saying that an employment contract is ending. Contracts get terminated, which is an awful word, but that's the
Yes.
legal terminology.
Yes.
I apologize to everybody for that. The first thing I do is I check whatever is written, what has been signed as an employment contract, to see what was the initial agreement between these two parties. And then the second question that I ask is why? What is happening? There's always a reason. And there could be a business reason, could be a management reason, could be a performance reason, and could be many, many other things, and that I would like to know. And then I prepare the scenario. What are the possibilities that we can offer the employee to end the contract? And then I get to talk to the employee. And I drive, and my team, or the team of boarding consultant, drives the conversation, so that the client doesn't make any legal mistake. We grab all the information, because it's important from an HR perspective for the employee to have a closure and to know the context in which this decision has been made. But as the legal employer and knowledgeable resource, we do it. I was thinking about your recently launched podcast about the radical candor, and how interested it is to be able to help the employee and to let them know what's happening. And you mentioned that it's difficult. And what I mentioned is sometimes it's just not possible, because what we do, we act as translators. We have two countries, because the employer and the employee live in different countries. So that's the nature of employer of record. We tend to employ global employer. We tend to employ people from other countries. Two cultures, two languages probably, and two very different legal systems. So what for somebody is the usual, you're being terminated because A, B, C, might just not be possible to say or structure in that way when you execute that decision. So you need to adapt that idea or that rationale into whatever is legally possible in that country. That does not mean that we are depriving the employee of any rights. We're just trying to make things possible. For example, to give you a concrete example, in the US, you can terminate for performance. And performance means somebody that is not working up to the standard that the company is setting. Whereas in most legislation in Latin America, termination for performance, the performance could be translated as gross misconduct. And the situations are defined by law. So you cannot say, well, we're terminating you for performance, because it's just not that.
Yeah, it's gonna land differently, isn't it?
It's very differently, and you might end up saying, okay, no cause.
The cultural aspect, because I always, when I was thinking of the complexities of terminating a job, in this kind of context, I always thought, oh, the legislation is different. You need to know the legislation, but it goes beyond that. It goes into the human need, into the cultural aspect, how people accept it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Some cultures need an introduction, a little bit of conversation, context, and some countries will see that as a waste of time and lack of respect. For example, in Asia, there's this expression of losing face. So you really need to respect the employees and the employees' context, and sometimes give the employee time to say goodbye to clients, to prepare the exit. Whereas in other cultures, it's just something that doesn't happen from one day to the other. The relationship is ended. Things like that. There's also not only the culture of different countries, but the senior roles need a different approach than not so senior roles or entry-level roles. More people are involved in high-level terminations. There's a marketing aspect involved, a succession planning. There's a lot of things that are not just the law that you can just avoid.
Wow. I never thought of of course, it's a complex process, but I'd never thought of all the different layers that are involved. And so, I have lots of questions, but before I go into my question of how on earth do you learn to do what you do? But anyway, I'm just going to drop that there. My other question is, I imagine you don't know the people that you're working with directly, do you? In most of these situations, the person that you are going to be, whose job you're ending, you probably never met them before, I imagine.
Never, or had a very you never met them, and that's why one of the reason why there's a dedicated person in charge of driving the end of employment contract. It is because there's a bond that is created. You are going to start interacting intensely for a few weeks or even months with a person that you're getting to know, and you really need to pay attention to them because it's an urgent matter, and it's a high risk and high tension situation. Every time, even if it's amicable, it's a highly tense situation. And in an HR environment or in a payroll environment, people are focused on, or they have other drivers. They have the regular cycles that are time consuming. The rush of onboarding somebody, the rush of getting the payroll cycle on time. It's very stressful, but it's a cycle, and it's the same every month, and it's very time consuming. But the stress is throughout the year. A termination and an end of contract is one in a time, and it's unpredictable because not only you have the culture, the legislation, you have the people's reaction that is, you cannot plan. And you cannot plan how the relation is going to end. Somebody might take it very calmly, others don't. You don't know, and you're going to learn that when it's happening. So that's why you need to be dedicated and focused.
And do you also get to know then the person who's representing the company as well? Because those situations, I don't know, how much do you also get to work very closely with the employer?
No, absolutely. We get to work with them. We try to get that off their plate because they need to focus on other things. Our clients are usually finance or HR internal employees from the client, and they have to deal with a lot of other situations. So we take care of that. But yes, we try to help them and see, well, if there's a termination for performance or something didn't go well, try to understand why and try to see if we can avoid happening that in the future. If it's a retrenchment or layoff and it has to do with something from the business, see how we can help and mitigate that situation as much as possible. Companies don't like to terminate employees. They have to. So it's something that it's not nice for any party. However, I do think that it's necessary. So it doesn't make any sense to avoid making that decision. You just need to do it correctly, and it will be very helpful for everybody. I have one case that I remember, that an employee that was so sad for months and for months. And this employee didn't take any, was not motivated, did the bare minimum for the job. And it also began affecting this person's life, was a depression, lack of motivation. And by ending the contract and getting the severance and closing that chapter, this person bloomed and completely changed. And I saw working immediately in another company in a different role and a new life. So you see, there's no justification to prolong them in time. They're as bad as something taken in a rush.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of the book Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, I think it is. And he was talking about when someone is underperforming, trying to move them to somewhere else in the company where they might be a better fit, or if not, to help them move on. Because a lot of the times, just where we are in our organizations, maybe we're having a terrible time there for whatever reason, or we can't perform. And actually what we need to do is to move on somewhere else where we can, like you say, blossom and bloom and be happy. So that's a great point. Can I ask you then, because you're talking about how you're getting actually quite close to especially the people that are leaving the company, let's not forget that you're doing this remotely, and that there is that. How do you get close to the person? I don't know, what's that experience like? Do you think it helps you to be remote or not? I don't know, just a little bit of reflection on how this remote space is affecting that part of your job.
For me, it's something completely natural. I learned to do it this way, and for me, I have a few like rules, like not too many people on the call. Always start by delivering the message and then giving time to conversation to evolve if it's necessary. Always be open for a follow-up conversation if once the shock of the news is settled, the person might need to talk again. And I once had a termination where I live, and I said, look, are you nearby? You can stop by and have a chat with me. And this person, he stopped by my office, and we stared at each other and had nothing to say because everything was done through the calls, and it was all right. And it was all right. And then the conversation continued online again. And it was very interesting. And for me, it was very reassuring because that happened to me when I was starting doing this job. And I said, well, I'm going to give this person the option that I'm not giving to anybody else. And it's going to be so special for him. And it turned out to be useless. Yes.
That's a great reflection on the fact that you said, yeah, well, I've always done it like this. So I don't know that this is your environment, your context. And I think sometimes we forget that the online medium for a lot of us that have been doing certain stuff online there, that's just how I learned. And I never had to translate how I was doing it in another way because I was almost born there in a way. And really interesting, that experience. So I'm going back to an earlier question that popped up, which is, it sounds like you're learning a lot about how to do this on the job.
Yes.
Is that mainly how you've been doing it, through just going through? How many years have you been doing this, more or less, Julieta?
5 years.
Okay. How has your learning process looked, more or less? I'm just curious.
And then there's another thing you do it on your own because you don't want to, you can't bring somebody along to teach on a termination conversation. Here's Johnny. He's going to sit with us and learn how we do this. You can't do that. So you always do it on your own. So that brings us to another very important aspect of this, and it's the team. You need a great support outside of the conversation, outside the one-on-one scenario with the employee or with the client. And we build strong support and strong teams. And strong teams are built because of the nature of this role. You naturally try to bond and to get along with your peers because you need comfort, you need comprehension, you need to share what happened and to give feedback. Oh, I just had this call and it went awful because this and this and this, or I'm going to do this and it's very difficult client because they're going through this, I don't know, restructuring, and they have little room to maneuver or to offer things. So the team is very important. It has to be a friendly environment and also a lighter environment. The group calls are not just to learn about the news of the company. They're also a place where you kind of have fun and share things in a different way. And it's not something that happens and creates naturally in high stress environment. You get this type of attitude also in the medical world, in medical wards. They are like that. They make jokes. It's part of a way to release the stress of listening to this type of conversation all the time. It's end of a contract, a surprise for the employee, and how are we going to process it?
And I think you told me when we first spoke that you referred to yourselves as the team of Terminators.
Yes.
And I can see what you're saying about the whole, the stress release and there's got to be a lighter side. And you are the people, I suppose, from what I'm hearing and is that you are the people where you can make light of what you do because you all know how important it is. And
yes.
You know that you take it seriously. So then you can joke about it.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a useful thing that we do. The ugly part is the element of a surprise. But then we help in a negotiation and we help both sides to reach an agreement and find something useful for both of them. We have many happy situations. It's the shock and the fact that it's not voluntary. It's a company action.
And so you've been looking after a team. Tell us a bit about what that's like, because I imagine you've got one, you're looking after them, but also you're also relying on them for support from what I'm hearing. How have you made sure that everyone was all right in a way? I mean, you've already started to say there's a certain atmosphere maybe when you get together online, but what are some of the things that you were looking out for in your team just to make sure that everyone was all right?
Well, try to have one-on-one conversations, make sure that the team calls were honest. There's something that I used to do, is celebrate mistakes. Whenever I found a mistake or something that didn't go well, try to look at this mistake and this happened and look, it wasn't that bad. We solved it. So everybody would share things that didn't go well, because it's the only time in the week that you can share your flaws and your mistakes, because when you're facing a client, you just can't do that. It's not just the offboarding has serious consequences, but it's the same attitude if you have a client, if you're on sales as well. There's always an image to project and things that you need to do. And you can't be like that all the time. It's not natural.
So do you think, I'm going to put words in your mouth, so do you think there's a lot of role modeling around being yourself, that vulnerability, that sharing of experiences? Do you think there's that element was very important, or?
Oh yeah. Oh, I
Yeah, yeah.
learned from them. I learned from them what they bring to the table, how they collaborate with each other without me directly fostering that, letting people create their world as well.
And do you think that in order to do that, do you think there's an element of what you bring to the table, like of the behavior that you exhibit when you're with them, that helps them then to feel safe to do that? Because that is something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I consider myself somebody that's with a stable mood, and I like a good joke. I like humor. I like that, and I think it's necessary. And even though my jobs are very serious, before doing Terminations, I used to do refugee determination. I worked for the United Nations, and I determined the status of over 500 refugee requests. And I always found humor and beauty and something cheerful in that environment as well.
Wow, I am just so in awe, because I couldn't do any of what you're doing, because I think it just, we all know our strengths, and I think that what you said, that you're like this, and that's what also allows you to be present and to do the work, and to do the work joyfully, and like you say, to find all the good stuff within the very tricky situations that you're landing in the middle of, really. And so with the global aspect of it then, have you found yourself running these global teams of Terminators as well? Because that's an added dimension to your team as well.
It's a global and distributed teams, different time zones, different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds. I just love that. I think that is fantastic.
What do you like about it? I mean, the diversity is nice, but anything else that you...
The diversity, to be able to have some a shared passion, but experience that in a different way with their different point of view. I love that. You never stop learning from people. I had a team member in Asia, and with different problems, different struggles, and different things that in Europe and in America. It's difficult, but it's so much fun.
Oh, good. That's what we want. People who are having fun in their work, even when the tricky.
Well, but for me, and for the people that tend to have this work, what we don't like is repetitive and cycles. So I think that we value the creativity you have to solve the problem on the spot or come up to a solution. Whereas, I don't know, I think that running a monthly payroll, I wouldn't do a good job. Because the aim is to avoid outliers and other things, whereas I thrive with the unexpected or with the complexity. And so did the team.
And as if this wasn't enough, you also have another side business, don't you? Well, actually, let me just go, before we go into the very different one. You are now an independent consultant with your own practice, is that right? Yes,
I just had a baby, and I always had my independent consulting firm. And that's what I'm doing now. I do employment contracts. I am the legal representative of an orchestra. So they have, so they have IP, intellectual properties, things that they need to solve. They have contracts. They have employment or collaboration relations to deal with. And I have my mobility clients that are back like normal post-pandemic.
And in addition to that, I'm even more curious about your other business. Tell us about that. It's in a completely different field. Yeah. Sorry, I made that joke as well.
Yes, completely
Listeners will
different.
understand. Yeah.
Completely different field, but it's a field. It happened by accident. My family had a vineyard, a land that nobody took care of, and we were about to lose it. So they called me as a lawyer and said, "Can you help us recover the papers because nobody is doing anything? So somebody's going to claim it." So I did that. I won the trial, and now what? There's this land with beautiful olive trees that they were dying, and I said, well, let's do something about it. So I run an olive grove in Mendoza, Argentina, and it's something that I'm doing. It's it's beautiful. It doesn't take a lot of time now. It's something that I can do on the side. It took me a lot of time, but now, because for the first time, I think in my life, I'm thinking in the very long term. So I'm not thinking about a business for me now, but something that I'm going to build for the next 1 or 2 decades, because a tree takes 8 years to grow. So it's naturally you're planning for the very long future. And that for me is so new and so refreshing, because in the world is so changing, and long term is such a strange word. Everything is planned for 1 year, 2 years, 6 months. And me thinking for 10 years is science fiction. Science fiction.
And yeah, tell us more. And the olive grove. So what do you do? I mean, what does it look like looking after some olive groves?
Well, it involves HR as well, but in a different context. For me, it was a very humbling experience. I've always worked with professionals, with people that went to college, that communicate through email. And I'm here with people that, unfortunately, I have 1 or 2 people that are illiterate, so no email and no contract, and everything is negotiated, and the promise that you give is very important. The trust that you generate is so important. And no team building, no icebreakers, nothing like that. But connection through other things that are also important. Food, to get around a table and celebrate when something is done, end of the harvest, for example. And then you have also the technical part, but because you need to keep the trees, you need to water them very, very little. Olive trees don't need water. They need 200 ml a year, something like that.
Really? Wow. That's nothing. Great.
Nothing. Or, very little. And then you need to cut the branches that are growing and give a little bit of food, like fertilizers or pesticides, and organize the harvest, that it's done by hand. You need to put your fingers like this, like Spider-Man, like your index and your middle finger up, and then you grab the branch and you pull towards you to a bag, and that's how you harvest.
Wow. Wow, it's such a contrast. I think it must be wonderful as well, a part of the diversity of the business, the diversity of the people, also to be in touch with something that is so not based on a screen and a keyboard as well. And that your presence is so different as well. Your own presence is very different.
Yes. It's not me who's managing. I am adapting to what's happening and try to help and out.
Nice. Excellent. Well, I think I have found out what you're doing. The only thing maybe we can just come back to, I was just thinking about the whole termination process, is
sure.
some of I very rarely go into advice mode on this show, actually, but I imagine that some of our listeners might have to at some point let go of some of their employees themselves, and they might be the ones that are in the same way as you're managing that whole conversation and interaction. They might have to be the ones that do it themselves. And I know for a lot of people, they might not have done that one ever in their lives, like have to end someone's contract. And some of them have had to do it online or with someone that they weren't seeing all the time. What are some of the things you've learned that could be more useful to those people around these terminations, especially in a remote context?
Well, my advice is, first of all, analyze the contract, see what's written, see what you have agreed. There's usually a termination clause that gets you started. You start from there, and then you analyze with the applicable law how is the termination going to unfold, and you plan around that, and then you have the conversation with the employee where you present your offer or how going to end the contract. And that conversation is very important. You need to be very clear of what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And if possible, say how much is the employee going to receive, or what is the employee entitled to. And then open the conversation to the discussion to other things. Why did that happen, or things like that. But first of all, mentioning that this is happening and what are the consequences. So that the employee doesn't feel that, I don't know, some sort of betrayal. You are talking to me, you've been talking to me for half an hour, and now you're mentioning this. It's not fair. So it has to be the first thing. And then you end the conversation and offer them the chance to have another call later on if this is came to as a surprise. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And if they don't, you focus on the execution of the admin part of the end of the contract, which is the payment, the signature of documents, and things like that. And you keep the person informed at all times. Say, I'm not going to call you in a week because it takes me a week to do this. I'm going to call you in 2 days because in 2 days I'm going to have an answer with regards to this question that you ask, or we're reviewing your counteroffer if counteroffers are possible. Let me get back to you in 2 days, in 1 day, or as soon as possible. The percentage of successful negotiations is really high. People don't really want to go to other instances like courts and involved lawyers. Sometimes there's no other solution than that. It happens. Sometimes there's reason for that. But in general, both parties agree without going to another instance.
It sounds to me like there's something we do about caring about the person, and then there's something we do about keeping them informed, managing that process and keeping them informed of the process. Because we might forget sometimes, I don't know, I know I might forget to do that. I'd be so worried about the other person. I'd be so like, okay, let's just make sure they're all right. And actually, one of the best things you can do is just keep them informed as you can.
Yes. And that's how you replace the fact that they cannot find you in an office, because that's the additional thing that you need to do. You can't knock on the HR door to see how your things are being solved. So this is what you need to do in a remote environment. Like say, I'm going to come back to you, and come back to you.
Good. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Julieta. Good. So what a conversation we've gone from. From termination in a global context all the way to the very earthy. Oh, sorry, I keep it. Just said it's calling for all these metaphors, isn't it? And all this, all of these connections. But of course, the very earthy practice of running an olive grove. So, listeners, if you want to get in touch with Julieta, check her out on LinkedIn. Her name again is Julieta Moreno. We'll put the links in the show notes. And if you want to get in touch with her via email, you can use julieta@morenoconsultora.com.ar. I won't stick that in the show notes in case of robots spamming you. But listeners, if you want her email address and you can't find it, just get in touch through the contact form. Julieta, anything else you want to say to the listeners before we say goodbye to them?
No, I hope you find this area of HR interesting, because there's my team and myself really love doing it.
Yes, I love that, and that is something for me that's I will say unexpected, because of course, but makes complete sense that you have to like what you're doing. It never struck me as much as such a vocational actually part of HR. So, thank you very much, Julieta.
Thank you, Pilar.
A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Orti. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.